Hello, all, and welcome back to another episode of Movies and Us, a weekly gathering place filled with conversations about movies, stories, and connection. My name is Jennifer Hahn.
And I'm Sarah Callan.
And today we are going to be reviewing the film Fight Club. And we are not alone. We're joined by two great friends of the pod. Y'all know them. They've been on this pod a bunch of times. They've covered a whole season of television with us on TV and Us pod. Pat and Nate are back, y'all. Okay. Give us your one-liner zingers as you introduce yourselves, you two.
Hey, I'm Nate, friend of the pod. Always excited to be here. And yeah, excited to have our own little fight club on this episode.
I don't like that intro. That was contentious. But yo, it's Pat, homie of the cast. You already know what it is. We here, right? 1, 2, 1, 2. We got to talk about Fight Club. It's going to be a good time. These ladies should have covered this movie 4 years ago. They didn't. Thank God they got us. Let's get into it.
Let's go. I always wait so expectantly for Nate's quippy little intro that he always does, and then for Pat's passionate reaction to it afterwards. It's great. That's how you know they're back. Okay. Well, Sarah, kick us off with an IMDb summary for Fight Club.
An insomniac office worker and a devil-may-care soap maker form an underground fight club that evolves into much more.
Much more indeed. Okay, so before we dive into our one-sentence summaries, our thoughts about the films, all that goodness, let's share some backstory, some back context. So I'm curious to know, one, when did you watch this movie, if you remember? How many times have you seen it? Are you like a Fight Club fanboy? Are you part of the film bro world? And maybe some of the ways that maybe this might have changed over time as you've thought about the film. So maybe some context on your relationship to the movie Fight Club before this.
I saw Fight Club for the first time when I was in high school, which is the perfect time for a young pubescent boy to see a movie about fight clubs. I actually wasn't super aware of this movie when it came out. I think I saw it in like 2003 or something like that. I was pretty young when it originally came out. I think I was like 12 years old. Yeah, I actually watched it for the first time on television, which is a perfect way to watch a movie about commercialization with commercial breaks. And yeah, I liked it then. Spoilers. I still like it now, but we'll get into it.
So you haven't seen it in the time period between high school to now?
That's not true. I've probably seen it in college
okay.
times and other times since then. But I haven't watched it in probably 10 years or something like that at this point. It's been quite a while, yeah.
All right. Okay. Pat?
Nope, Sarah.
All right, Sarah?
Well, okay. I've been called on. Yeah, I've seen this before. It's probably been like 15 years or so since I watched it. So yeah, I was, I think, just out of high school, like early college, when I watched it. So it's been a minute. It was time to return to this and revisit it again for sure.
All right.
So I saw this around the same time as Nate. Yeah, I was like 11 when this came out. By the way, this movie turned 25 2 weeks ago today.
That's right.
Mm-hmm.
I remember seeing that. Oh my gosh, I forgot about that.
Jen, this movie's damn near older than you.
This is actually fortuitous timing. This might drop with the 4K re-release in a couple weeks. this episode.
Nice. Is that a thing?
I think so. Yeah, I was reading about it. I think he's putting together. He's been teasing some stuff on Instagram. Fincher.
But there's some graininess to this movie that needs to be there. I don't want to see no polished up shiny version. That ain't what I'm here for. Anyway, I saw this also for the first time in high school, and I remember this was one of two movies that I borrowed from my neighbors who were like older brothers to me who lived across the street at that time. And this was one of two movies, I borrowed many movies, that they said, do not let your mom know that I let you borrow this. And so I waited till after she went to bed and I watched it with headphones on in the dark.
Wow. And you were 11?
No. It came out when I was I was the esteemed wise age of 14 when I watched this for the first time.
Oh my goodness.
Yeah, that sounds right.
So for both of you, just like going through the preteen years with this movie as your Bible.
Yes.
Guiding light.
This guy's got some good ideas.
Yeah.
He does though. In terms of how many times I've seen it, I've probably seen this movie over 10 times, but I realized today, thinking about it, I probably haven't seen it since my days of living on the East Coast, which would be about 9+ years ago.
Oh,
Yeah, I think
wow.
I'm in the pretty much the same exact boat.
Mhm.
Nate, you and I might have watched it together the last time we both watched it. I don't know.
When you pitched doing this as an episode, I was like, man, I don't know. Have you seen that movie in a while? I don't know if it's aged well.
You're welcome, is all I'm gonna say.
That's how I feel about the like romantic comedies that I watched with my girlfriends as like tiny humans at sleepovers. And you're like, oh, this movie was so good. You watch it now, you're like, this is trash. This is hot
I mean,
trash.
Jennifer, let's be honest, Failure to Launch was trash when it came out, not just now.
Yeah, we were not watching Fight Club at our 13-year-olds sleepovers. There's a long list of movies I haven't seen before that I know are iconic. This was one of them. I hadn't seen this movie before. And in one of my first conversations with our very own Pat James, we were at work and in our first like one-on-one call, and we were just chatting about like life, what do you like to do outside of work, all that goodness. And I mentioned we had a podcast about movies, and we specifically like to talk about like the themes and how they relate to society and culture and trends and human nature, all that good stuff. He was like, you have to watch Fight Club. Have you not done Fight Club yet? And so this is 4 years in the making, y'all. 4 years later, we're here. We're doing the dang thing.
You brought that up in the first time you heard about the podcast?
Well, their whole shtick, or not shtick,
You
but
can get called into an HR meeting. Bringing
look,
up the...
their whole thing was about all this relational stuffs to society and the way we navigate and maneuver in our lives. And the first thing that popped into my head was Fight Club. In fact, you know what? This is probably the most
fair enough.
significant thing I brought to Jen's life, and I reintroduced her to stuffing. I don't give a fuck what y'all say.
Like the Thanksgiving side?
Yes, sir. You're welcome.
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay. Well, now that we have that full context on our relationship to Fight Club, I'm curious what everybody's thoughts are this time around. Some of y'all 10 years ago, some of y'all 15 years ago, some of us for the first time. It'll be a good combo. Okay. In Movies and Us tradition, we start off with our one-sentence summaries for Fight Club. Pat, since you were calling people out earlier, you're going first this time.
Fine. Step into your heart chakra. Step into your IKEA and find your power animal.
Okay.
Wow.
That was a journey. Wow.
You're welcome.
I need to get that on like a mug, on a doormat. Nate, what's your one-sentence summary?
I'd tell you, but I'm not supposed to talk about it. Mine is haven't been mind fucked like that since grade school.
Wow. Okay. Sarah, what is your one-sentence summary?
Mine is insomnia sucks.
Yep.
Or does it? There's so much you can do with that time.
You could do a lot of things. Should you, though? Probably not. Sleeping would probably be a better alternative to a lot of things in this movie.
My one-sentence summary is Tyler Durden walked so the Gen Z babies could run.
I love that. That one wins.
Okay, well, let's dive in this first little section, which we'll keep kind of short. Let's go around and share our thoughts about Fight Club, how they've evolved, how they've changed, especially in this time around watching it, what some of your big thoughts were. And we won't spoil the movie in this section. I think it's like 25 years since the movie came out. So we're going to keep the section real short, and then we're going to dive into...
Hold on, Jen goes first because she's the only one on the call who watched it for the very first time.
All right. Oh, man. Where to begin? Let me just say that I liked thinking about this movie more than I liked watching this movie is probably my initial thought reaction to this. It's funny, I was talking to Sarah yesterday. She's like, I'm just curious how you're gonna feel about this movie. And she knows me well, and she's correct. So there's a lot of intensity. I just, in happening this man's headspace was like an exhausting experience, but there's a lot of richness here. So I enjoyed thinking about it afterwards. I think there's a lot that's like...
You're welcome.
Yes, thank you. Yeah, I think there's a lot here. The biggest thing that I referenced in my 1 sentence summary is thinking about like how this movie has aged, which I think was a question that Nate was also thinking about as well. And it's fascinating to see how like this is so much a movie of the time that it came out in 1999, right before the 2000s, and so much of the landscape of how the younger generations especially are thinking about so many of these themes has evolved so much. So like feeling that delta and how much progress we've made since the time that this came out was kind of fascinating to think about. So that's where I spent a lot of my headspace circling around. Sarah, we'll do the reverse order of this. We'll have you two go last. Sarah, what are your thoughts about a Fight Club this time around?
Yeah, I think I had forgotten how funny this movie is. Like, it's a whirlwind and a lot. Like, wow, is it overwhelming? But it's also very, very funny. And I think I had forgotten that piece of it. It's very David Fincher, and I am a Fincher fan. And so this movie is a lot. But I had mostly a fun time watching it, as kind of deranged as it is at times. And then, like you said, Jen, there's just a lot to think about the themes and I mean things that are still relatable today. So I think there's a lot here. It's an entertaining whirlwind on the surface, and then I feel like it's one of those that the more that you dig, the more that you find to think about and just, consider. So there's a lot here, and I don't think I fully grasped that the first time I watched it.
All right. You both. Which one wants to go first?
I'm gonna go because Nate went before me last time. I had a great time revisiting this movie.
Why am I not surprised? In the least.
But I had an interesting time revisiting this because, Jen, you talk about deltas in terms of some of the theming and the landscape. I actually think that there's relevancy in it that holds up today in a very interesting and almost eerie way. Well, we can dive into this when we talk, but as we've shared, when I saw this, I was 14 years young, thought I knew everything about the world, but really didn't know shit. And like it's interesting because there's all these concepts and things they're bringing up: capitalism, being responsible for yourself, making something meaningful out of your life that like we're lifetimes away seemingly from where I was at life. And now as someone in my mid 30s, I'm like, oh shit, I'm like at the age they are in this movie. And now isn't just conjecture. They are literally picking at some of my heartstrings. So I had a great time.
Of all the movies that would pick at your heartstrings, it would be Fight Club.
Pat's gonna shave his head and be shirtless by the end of this call.
Bro, do you know how many people I have standing on my balcony that I've been ridiculing all day?
Yeah, so similar to Jen, like I still like this movie a lot. Like I think it's very well made. I think there's a lot to chew on and a lot to think about. A lot of it's just plain awesome and memeable and just super well made. And I'm also a Fincher fan, and yeah, it's a good film. That said, I was kind of struck by how flawed I think some of the theming and messaging of this movie is on this watch. I think it kind of falls into the category of films that I think ultimately fail their message by kind of wanting to have their cake and eat it too, which we can get into a lot more later because I have a lot more to say on that. But I also think that this movie's kind of horribly prescient and timeless. Its release was delayed a couple times, and rumor has it that was due to Columbine at the time and also Woodstock 99, two high-profile incidents of like male violence. And then you hear the hero or anti-hero of the film evangelizing sort of all this, some of the anti-consumerism stuff I agree with, but a lot of it's like incel doctrine things. And then you watch it today after like Jan 6 and in a time of like normalized domestic terrorism, and the whole thing feels kind of icky. So yeah, it's a complicated watch. I still really like it, but yeah, it was interesting. It's a lot to think about.
Aren't you so happy we're recording this literally 1 week before Election Day?
Yeah, I know, right? Don't even start. It's gonna be hard not to talk about politics on this pause.
Not Civil War by Alex Garland being the last movie that we watched too, or really little narrative arc happening here. My gosh. Okay, well, let's include a spoiler alert. If you haven't seen Fight Club, it's been 25 years, and we don't care. We're diving in. Diving right in. Okay. Maybe what are some of the big things that really stood out to you this time around that were shocking, surprising, maybe different from you, what you remembered, and that your view of that has shifted or changed over time? So, Nate, I think you mentioned a couple of things. Pat, you mentioned a couple of things that have like resonated more now than maybe before. I'm curious about those things.
Well, I guess to my point about, having its cake and eating it too. I think that there's like this interesting group of movies that's like wants to like teach you that like what is happening on screen is like a cautionary tale, and it's like a bad thing. Like it's advocating against the actions of the protagonist, but it's also awesome what you're watching, and it's really cinematic, and it's like no one's gonna walk away from this thinking that. Like Roger Ebert gave it a good review that I'll quote real quick. Like, of course, Fight Club itself does not advocate for Durden's philosophy. It's a warning against it. And then he goes on to say, but my guess is that the audience will like the behavior but not the argument, and a lot more people will leave this movie and get into fights than will leave it discussing Tyler Durden's moral philosophy. And then he says the images in movies like this argue for themselves, and it takes a lot of narration to argue against them. And I think that's a really great point. It kind of like brings up like that movies work on more levels than just like their textual point, and like visuals have their own meaning. Like casting one of the hottest men to ever live has its own meaning.
Dude, isn't Eddie such a bombshell?
Like effortlessly fashionable, like does whatever he wants guy, and then the movie's like, yeah, no, don't do what this guy's doing. That's not right. So yeah, I don't know. It makes me wonder, is it possible to make like a cinematic movie where the message of the movie is a cautionary tale? I could really only think of like two examples leading up to
Civil
this.
War. Just kidding.
No, I think that's actually an example in the other camp, because like you have like all these fights, and your De La Soul beat drops, and then it's just like, no, it's an anti-war movie, and it's like, fuck you, no, it's not. But yeah, I don't know. Like you have this problem with like Goodfellas and Scarface and all these things, like Taxi Driver, Joker, and like all these groups like co-opt these movies. But like what's happening on screen is exciting and like entertaining. I don't know how possible that is. The only two examples I thought of are like Requiem for a Dream and Uncut Gems, but both of those are about addiction, and they're also not rewatchable movies.
I would say one of those is definitely not rewatchable. Okay, excuse you very much. Requiem is rough. The R in Requiem stands for rough with two F's. Anyway, let's keep it back moving to Fight Club. Sarah. No, I called on Sarah before. Jennifer.
Teacher Patrick is in the house. Do I need to raise my hand?
Whoa.
Well, in responding to Nate's point, I think that that is a really great point. I think seeing the like cult love for this movie and kind of the fanboys around it is so indicative of that exact fact. And like, it's such a film bro movie because so much of that dynamic is like thinking that there's something really deep here, but also like not spending the time really or the mental space to like dig into all of those themes and what Fincher's really trying to say, and just being like, yeah, it's so deep, man. Like there, and seeing it for the surface level, and that surface level is exciting and he's charismatic and you want to be part of his crew. But like, if we think 3 steps forward in that thought train, we can see how it's problematic. But I think the love for this movie is like fascinating to see, because you've got the camp of folks that like really understand it for the full layered text of what it is, and then others are just kind of understanding the kind of outer crust of it. So that's really interesting, because I feel like we've seen that actually play out, of like misunderstanding the movie but like loving it for that irreverent, rebellious, charisma that obviously Tyler has. One of the things that I think is fascinating about the structure of the film is that we end on such a open-ended feeling of like how our narrator feels about everything that's unfolded, which I think is why it feels like it's an open question mark around how people can interpret it. Like if this movie was the 3/4 of a movie and then we had a section, it could be short, but just this like reckoning of the real implications of what we've done, this would be a much more interesting and layered text, probably less fun and leaving you on a little bit less of a high, but there's time to really like look back on all of the things that has been done. But like it just kind of leaves on an open-ended like, that was a good time. Wasn't that a fun adventure? And like he's not here anymore, but what do we like, wasn't that really great? So I think that is a fascinating aspect of this movie, is how it's structured and where it chooses to end, because the ending is really what leaves the final point and thesis of the film. I think that the fact that they end with Marla is fascinating. I've been thinking about like Marla's inclusion as one of the 3 variables in this equation, and like her kind of representing this like emotional vulnerability that our main character is really looking to avoid, and then ultimately like joins hands with at the end, is like kind of a fascinating like little uptick at the end for that character, but it's really all just implied.
Well, and kind of to your point, Nate, it's interesting how a movie like this does lead to real world consequences. So there was somebody after this movie, I think I read it was in 2009, a teenager blew up a Starbucks in Manhattan because he wanted to launch his own Project Mayhem. So it's things like that. I mean, something similar happened after Taxi Driver too. Somebody tried to assassinate somebody, and it was related to the Taxi Driver movie. So it's so interesting to think about these works that are created, and then how sometimes those are taken and run with in a very twisted way that's kind of the opposite of what the movie really intended. And so I think I don't know, that's part of the complication of this film. There's so much here, and yet there's incorrect ways to interpret it that can lead to real world consequences, which is just, I don't know, it's interesting to think about, because I don't know, when we talk about movies every week. I'm not often thinking about, oh, this movie can be taken and can lead to some very severe consequences in the real world, like some people have run with a movie like Fight Club.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, as cinephiles, the literal reason why opening night, quote, midnight showings are now 7 p.m. on Thursdays is because of Aurora, Colorado, because of a response someone had from The Dark Knight. Like that has changed the behavior of like how cinemas do first releases of movies. Speaking on the movie, I remember seeing this, having already seen Seven, and thinking David Fincher was going to be my favorite director of all time, forever and ever and ever. Hugs, kisses, and heart emojis, even though emojis weren't a thing at that time. And I still largely love Fincher and keep an eye on what he's doing and watch most of his works, but that isn't what necessarily concluded. But I still have a lot of love for this movie. I agree, it is very layered. It is. I can also still remember being in college, and every single year, like the first weekend, like right in the freshman dorms, there's always like some asshole selling posters, and like the top 3: Scarface, Blow, Fight Club. And it's just like I hated how much of like a bromantical spectacle like Fight Club is, and you can tell that it's that by certain, like with certain people, you know, who like think they get it because they get the edginess, but they don't really get it.
That image rules. Brad Pitt with his shirt off and a black eye, like fucking rules.
Yeah, I want it on my wall always.
Yeah, for sure.
And like cut to Nate's like college dorm room with like a giant ass poster of it on his wall.
Mhm.
What was on my wall? Nothing good. I'm not gonna share.
I think you should. I think now you have to.
I can't remember. I think I had a V for Vendetta poster.
That sounds like you.
I think the thing that is like, it's part of why this movie is problematic, but also part of why it's just like exciting and interesting, is because so much of what Tyler's like root source of his ethos is does seem to feel somewhat on point. He takes it too far, and his actions and methodologies are obviously problematic, but like the questions around like purpose and zooming out and thinking about your life existentially, and then wondering like what breaking out of the molds that maybe society lulls you into, like all of that, I was intoxicated by. I was like, yeah, let's think about, are we happy or not? Are we just following the mold, or is there something else that we want to go and search for and do that heart work to find? And so I think that's why maybe he's easily such a like charismatic anti-hero, is because like he's half true and half right in some of his thoughts, but not fully. And that's the problem, is that it feels like it somehow feels right to like question these things and then to do something about it.
I mean, that's kind of the thing, though, is like Edward Norton is entranced and intoxicated by like Tyler's views. But as time goes on, the half-bakedness of them and like questionability of them becomes very apparent, and he starts to like divert his path and his alignment. And then you get that whole conflict that exists in the second half of the movie.
Well, I'm curious, like, especially because you both watched it in such like formative years, what like stood out to you then, and then how's that changed now?
So this goes back to my point of like when I watched this for the first time, like even though you think you're like king of the world, you really don't have a grasp of it.
Mm-hmm.
For instance, like three things come to mind. One, in the good old state of Maine, in the top of the Northeast, we do not have Starbucks or IKEA. So I'm watching this and I'm like, the fuck is a Starbucks? The hell is an IKEA? So like contextually, I'm like, I see him buying stuff, but like, I don't know. And then the drab of working in an office in that monotony. I thought I understood it, but now as a 35-year-old who's worked in corporate America, excuse me, 36, who's worked in corporate America, like I can say I understand it.
Yeah.
The other thing is like I really liked, and I feel like as a 14-year-old gravitated towards the anti-consumerism piece of it, which I still really appreciate and still like that's the part probably that tugs on my heartstrings. But let's face it, when I was 14, I hadn't bought a fucking couch yet. At 36, I bought a couch. I bought two couches. And let me tell you, there is some truth to feeling like that fucking couch problem is taken care of. And so when I hear this in the movie now, it's like a gut punch of like, oh man, if my couch just like spontaneously combusted and burnt to ash, I would literally feel like I have a couch problem. I don't want a couch problem. Oh, I'm a consumerist mess.
Yeah, very similar for me. I think like the deeper layers of this movie didn't really hit for me. Like when I first watched it, it was just like that was really entertaining and it looked awesome, and the twist at the end was great. Yeah, that's all. That's really all there was to it. There was something tugging at the back of my brain that I like didn't really understand the message, where it like the buildings all fall down, and then like it just kind of ends, and I was like, all right, so what did we learn here today? But then I was like, it doesn't matter. I also agree that the anti-consumerism points hit the hardest today, and I think are like the most seductive today. And like advertising has us working jobs that we hate
To buy shit we don't need.
is like, yeah, if nothing else, you nailed that one, because that is 100% true.
I need my iPhone 16, yo. I don't.
Yeah.
But I feel like I do. I don't want to feel like that.
Some of the parts that really like resonated with me were some of the intercuts with him at his corporate job. That's something that I'm sure if I had watched when I was younger, I'd been like, oh yeah, it's spoofed a bunch of times and portrayed in film and media of the like hustle and grind of a corporate America job. But having now been in it for a couple of years, that really stood out a lot. And especially the scenes where Tyler's asking and pressing and prompting our main character to like really question, like, why are you doing this? Like, what makes you happy? And like our narrative has no idea. Like he's never even figured it out. I love the two guys in the back seat that are like, paint a self-portrait, build a house. Like they have an answer, you know? And I think so many are so easily lulled by the hustle and grind of especially corporate working environments. So that one I'm like, man, that piece is still timeless. I do think that again, referencing back to my once in a summer, I think that the younger generations are already questioning and rejecting that ideal. Like we're all millennials here, all four of us. So like we very much did not. But I think the younger generation just saying like I'm not living by that. I'm not getting intoxicated by any of the shine and the gloss of a nice little job and some promos. Like I think that is where I see the delta. I'm sure in 1999 some of those bits probably hit so hard for people and really like maybe were thought provoking, but I think we've made a lot of progress in the younger generations on that front.
Is that true? I'm not that hip with the kids these days. What are they up to?
Yeah, a lot of them, like the themes around anti-consumerism and around work, I'm like, Gen Z's embrace this and they're doing it in a real chill way, not the Tyler way, you know? They aren't necessarily like fitting into the cookie cutter molds and like they're really like advocating for like social issues in high school, you know, and like becoming really passionate. They're very woke. The concepts of like going on finding a corporate job and just like hustling really hard at them and slaving away at them, like not attractive to them at all. It's a fascinating like pendulum swing in the other direction from the way that we as millennials were kind of trained up and taught to like really invest ourselves in at work and play that corporate game.
Mm.
Gen Z's like, nah, not really that into it. And it really shows. Like there's folks at work and then a lot of friends of mine that have the younger generation, Gen Z, entering the workplace, and it's like palpable in the way that they show up. It's so funny to hear some of the stories, but it's great. I think that like the questioning of that system is really awesome.
I agree. I mean, I can think about like, especially being of the last generation that had an experience with no internet proliferated and available widely. Like I can think about going to college and even my mom was still like of the mind of like, go work at a big company, get a pension. She didn't realize we were like 2 years away from pensions die, 401ks for everybody, like whole thing. And so, yeah, it's just, I'll tell you right now. So Nate and I, when we went to college, we were in a co-op program. So we got a little behind the curtains exposure to like office life before we graduated. And by the time I graduated, I was like, I fucking hate this. I don't want to do this. We have to do this. I don't want to do this. Like, this is gonna suck. And it's funny because I wonder like how much of that coulda, woulda, shoulda perhaps was influenced by like a movie like Fight Club, where like I thought I could like empathize and understand it, but it wasn't until I could live the experience that I was like, damn, yeah, this is as drab and terrible as that movie made it out to be, and I had no fucking idea.
Yeah.
So Tyler was right.
Speaking of which, this is really important. Everyone should make sure that they do their open enrollment because it's closing soon. So be sure that you fill out your forms. It's really important, everyone.
Nate, are you an FSA or an HSA guy?
I don't know. It depends on how I'm feeling. How do I want to gamble on my health next year? You know, let's just. I gotta kind of guess. How am I gonna feel like in my organs next year?
Mm. Sarah, you haven't spoken in a while. I want to hear what you have to say.
I'm just wondering, you know, we're watching this movie 25 years after it came out, and
And
there are
14
some
days.
parts and 14 days. Thank you, Pat. That was an important clarification.
Important. Yep.
And so there are some things that are still really relevant, really like meaningful, but there are some things that haven't aged as well. And so I'm very curious with this next generation and how our world is changing so rapidly all the time. Will this movie still be as relevant in 10 years, 15 years? You know, is there maybe more of a shelf life to Fight Club just because our world is changing at such an accelerated pace, and like the way that we relate to each other, the way that we relate to work is so different than it used to be? I'm curious. Like, it would be interesting to talk to people of a younger generation and see like, hey, does this resonate with y'all, or us millennials kind of more jacked up because we really related to this when we were younger.
I was actually thinking a good amount about that rewatching this past weekend, and that I think that I this is going to be weird. This is going to be perhaps the most spicy comment made today. Don't care. I think about this movie the way that I think about Steinbeck books that I had to read in school as a kid. And like there's old timiness in like the setting, the backdrop, the things that are happening, but there's much relevancy in like some of the relationships and like the things that the different characters are trying to accomplish. And so I think that this movie is one where like eventually, yes, it will phase out where like what you're actually seeing on the screen is irrelevant. But like a lot of those core themes, like I think about the idea of enlightenment, like that's never, I feel like that's never going to go away. The idea of awakening something in someone, them having a moment where their light brightens when it's been dim for an amount of time, and that's just been their experience. Like those are some of the themes that I'm just like, no matter what, I think those will always be relevant. I think about Raymond K. Hessel. Even in the globalized world of technology, if you put someone in a situation where they literally thought they might be breathing their last breaths, they very likely could have some epiphany revelatory experience that does make their breakfast amazing and puts them on a track to pursuing something that fulfills their life more. Maybe, maybe not. But like these are the kind of like discussion points that while rewatching, I'm like, I don't know. I could still see this being relevant. Maybe, maybe not, as opposed to just like, oh yeah, that's a dead horse. Like we've aged out past that.
Yeah, I 100% agree, actually. I think that, like, it might not hit and resonate the same way that it does because, like, the circumstances are different. It's maybe not about anti-consumerism, or the concept of, like, work dynamics might change and evolve over time. Hopefully they do, and that'll be great. I actually don't want those parts of this movie to age very well. But the concepts of, like, power dynamics, I think, is, like, at the root of so many of those situations, and, like, who gets to tell you how to live your life, whether it's the advertisers or it's your boss at work, at a job that you don't want to do, and rebelling or seeking freedom from those is, I think, like, universally going to be timeless, because there'll always be these power dynamics and systems of influence that you voluntarily put yourself in, or you don't realize that you've put yourself in. And, like, being awakened in that way, Patrick, I think that theme, like, in human society, will always be there. And it'll be fascinating to see, like, how each generation perhaps interprets and applies Fight Club to the issues and the circumstances of their generation. That will be interesting to see. I'm curious to hear what everyone's thoughts and interpretations of Marla are. Because I think that, like, there's a way to write this movie that, like, doesn't need her, doesn't include her, and a lot of the same points I think could be made, but her inclusion feels so significant. She's such a, like, prominent thread line throughout the movie. She's constantly like showing up, invading in the narrator's environments, and I think that, like, she feels fundamental to the way to interpret some of the, like, themes or thesis of this film. So I'm curious your thoughts on, like, her role. Like, how did you interpret her? And, like, yeah, tell me your thoughts about Marla.
I think she, watching this today versus back when, she is kind of like an attempted check and balance that doesn't necessarily succeed with the narrator, Edward Norton's character. I don't know. I think she is kind of necessary because, like, if she wasn't there, as the story is told, he would just be sleeping better than baby sleep every single night, and that would be all she wrote. I think her showing up now, having watched this multiple times too, like you can kind of pick up more on when she responds to him when he's like, Tyler isn't here, or like, what are you getting out of all this? Like, you can start to see, oh, they very carefully crafted this to be in line with like the inevitable twist that's coming that the first time you watch it you may or may not know is coming. And so like her showing up when he's like drunk outside and there's people doing stuff on the gravel patch and he's like, Tyler's not here, and she's like, what? Like, I don't know, I think she was in a way the one thing that kept him somewhat grounded to reality.
Yeah, I think uh, less of a character and more of like a MacGuffin in the movie. She's like the kind of like anti-Tyler. She's like any like the narrator kind of throughout the whole movie chooses to either pursue her or to pursue Tyler. And it happens from like the very first scene when he's making the payphone call. He calls her, he hangs up, and then he calls Tyler. And then every time he continues to pursue Tyler, things like he self-destructs further and further, et cetera, et cetera. I think that she's intended to be sort of like the anti-Tyler, but I think that she's, I don't know, a little bit like underwritten in that regard. She's just kind of like a chaos, like a character of chaos throughout most of the movie. I think that there's like a not so charitable interpretation of this movie where like an emotionally stunted incel meets a girl that he likes and he has so little concept of how to deal with that he has a psychotic break and then he figures it out and it's you know, he fixes himself. Yeah, I don't know, those are my off the cuff thoughts.
No, I definitely had a similar thought while I was watching it again. I was like, this is very like incel. Like, Marla, what you doing, girl? You are in danger. This is not great. Let's get you out of this situation. Yeah, I wish that she was a little bit more developed. I have so many questions about Marla. Like, there's many other choices other than this narrator. You can choose anything else and it would maybe be a better choice than this. So I don't know, I think I wanted a little bit maybe more for her character to like better understand her, but that's not the point of the movie. But I'm left with many questions about Marla.
Yeah, she's almost like the manic pixie dream girl before that trope existed.
Interestingly enough, I would also say like I didn't even think about the incel piece until you brought it up at the top of the recording, Nate. Like, because that wasn't like a widely known term or like concept. But yeah, when you think about like the characters in this, it's like I struggle with it because there is this element of a lot of the characters like feeling lost and finding community that I empathize with, that I think is important and necessary as part of the human experience. But then there's also this like, that doesn't mean you need to blow things up and be a toxic asshole and like all that, this other over dramatic masculine shit. So it's, yeah, that's a interesting part of the narrative in terms of how it's aged that I think is not necessarily so great.
I think that's kind of the part of the movie that like ages the best. It's like a lot of the inciting ideas are true, like the things that they're experiencing are true, and like the isolation and loneliness is true. But then like you take that to extremes and you have like a bunch of like aimless under socialized men and you you get them all together and you might not like the results. The whole thing's kind of laced with things that just like remind me of some of the stuff I've heard today.
I mean, let's be honest. What you're saying is that the basement of Lou's Tavern is basically a real life subreddit, and you're not wrong.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, fight clubs exist today. It's called Twitter now.
No, it's called X, actually,
Yeah.
asshole. I do want to point out one thing, or a couple things just about the film and getting away from like the specifics around the theming and stuff. Like, I also really love like just the dark drab. I know there's a term for it, like the cinematography, that kind of like gray greenness to it. I feel like this is maybe one of the first movies that I remember like really seeing and making an observation about like that cinematic element. Another thing that always stands out to me when I watch this is I don't think this movie would have been nearly as great if it was not narrated. And when you read the book, it is narrated the same exact way. It is just like stream of consciousness, thoughts, quirkiness, and all that. And so I really like that they decided to lean in and like adopt that same style of narration that you feel in the book, which I read after watching the movie. Without that, if everything had to be explained in the scene, there would have been, I feel like, just like it would have been over explanation, and like a lot of the points would have been convoluted in like too much dialogue and things like that. I also think like the journey you go on with our narrator, who has no name, Cornelius, Travis, any of the dumb names that he uses every night, is also like a very amusing thread. It's like being in like a sidecar of amusement, and you're just kind of like on this journey with him. And I think that, and I also, the last thing I would say is I love the score. In college, I used to just listen to the score because it's completely instrumental, but it's very like not boring. It's not lo-fi beats. Like it changes up every 3 minutes, and like before you know, it's like, damn, I just been sitting here for an hour. Like whole thing.
Yeah, I think the dialogue is so good. Well, I guess it's not even dialogue. It's like the voiceover bits. Like it's so fast, it's so quick. Everything he says feels like the thesis of the film somehow. You know what I mean? And
Mhm.
there's just so much that's zooming at you that there are so many where I was like, man, I need to like sit with that one thing he just said for like 30 minutes, but I don't got time. Like we're on to the next thing.
Oh, this is an incredibly quotable movie,
Yeah.
both in narration and in screen dialogue. Like it is, which is why it's such a fanboy movie.
Yeah.
Yeah. But it's so strong and it's so like clever and intelligently written. So I think sometimes voiceovers like really don't work in a film, especially with this much voiceover. But because he is so distinct in his mental headspace that you really feel like you're living inside of his head, and I think it also helps play up the what is real, like what is reality bit that we first feel like it's from his insomnia, and then slowly see that there's actually like more of a twist there happening. So I think that all of that is really well done.
Jen, did you catch the twist before its reveal, or did it not really hit you until the end? Because they seed it, and I remember thinking like something's weird's going on here, and probably even had the thought they're the same person, but I remember not being able to confidently conclude that. So when it happened, I still was like, "Oh my God, this is crazy."
I've never seen you do that before. That was wild. Or that voice on you. Wow.
Do you need
Well
do you,
done.
do you need a minute? Do
Yeah.
we just need to sit here in
I'd like to
silence?
give the award for best actor this
Did you
year.
not know the twist going into the movie?
No.
Whoa,
Yeah.
that's amazing.
Yeah. There's some like iconic like movie things that I have like there's some stuff in Harry Potter that I know like a bunch of people die, but I still don't know who has died yet because I haven't finished that. Clearly, I don't inhabit the fanboy Fight Club fanboy part of X, so that's great for me. Protected my brain and my mental sanity.
Did you catch there's three instances in the first act of the movie where you see like a quarter-second flash of Tyler Durden.
No, I didn't catch that.
Like, are you fucking kidding?
Mm-mm.
Well, guess what you get to do in the next week? Rewatch the first act of Fight Club. There's literally three
No
scenes
way.
where Edward Norton is like interacting with the world, and you're looking kind of through his perspective. One's at a doctor, one's
Copy machine.
copy machine, the other one's like down an alleyway, and you just see this red flash, and it's Tyler in his jacket, and it's like a quarter of a second. And I remember
Mm.
after watching it the first time, when I watched it the second time,
It's the one frame spliced in thing.
exactly, going
Mm.
back and pausing and finding the frame and being like, oh, that's interesting, that's clever, because I saw it the first time I watched it, but I didn't really like think too much about it. And then you see him. Did you catch him in the airport on the conveyor?
I don't think so. No.
See, that was a whole fucking thing. Did you even watch this movie, or were you
I
doing your
did.
taxes with it on in the background? Because there's a point where Edward Norton's on like one of those like walking conveyor things, and they pan the camera, and you see Tyler, all cool guy, slouched on the railing, just going right on by with his big ass sunglasses.
I mean, you knew Brad Pitt was in the movie, right? Like, how'd you miss
Yes, I
that?
did know. I did know.
This was a re-experience of the Vanisher in Deadpool 2, where Brad Pitt's invisible and says nothing as far as Jen's concerned.
Look, there's a lot happening in this movie, okay?
Jen's just texting. She's like, "Oh, this movie's exhausting."
Yeah, no, really. I think my brain probably just like
Edward Norton
stalled
by
out.
himself is just a whole thing.
This movie was exhausting, y'all. I had to take some deep breaths after.
I don't think we got an answer. Did you see the twist coming, or were you surprised?
I didn't like know it was coming. No, but there's a point where he consistently is asking like, "Am I dead?" I think right before the twist is like fully revealed. Where I was like, he went from like, "Is this real? Have I slept yet?" to like it now escalating. So I was like, oh, okay. We're also kind of at the like 3/4 mark. So I'm like, something big usually happens around this time. But I felt like there was something coming, but I didn't expect that it would be a split personality. The casting choice is great though for Tyler, like put the pinnacle actor of like American male masculinity as like the fantasy and idealized version of what Edward Norton wants to be. Like, perfect. Well done.
Brad Pitt actually did something that the only other person I know of to do it was Jim Carrey for Dumb and Dumber, where he allowed them to remove a piece of his tooth so it appeared chipped for the film, and then had either it or some filler like put back in after the fact.
Gosh.
Like, that's some dedication. I don't care what people want to say about Daniel Day-Lewis being a method actor. He ain't methoded that hard ever. Sorry, Nate. I didn't realize you were still on the call.
You looked me right in the eyes when you said that.
I did too. I really did.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. I'd probably remove a whole tooth if someone paid me $17.5 million, but that's just me.
Look, all I'm saying is that the man did it.
And that's 1999 money. That's
Yeah.
Right? Like,
that's like $60 million today.
that's so good.
Look, you bringing math into the equation, whatever. I'm just saying. I noticed it because we see his mouth. It's what it is. One last thing that I caught that I thought was interesting was the narrator is always an observer in all of the support groups that he goes to. And yeah, he like cries, but he doesn't really share. He does like one-on-one thing. And I never noticed, though I like caught it, but like never thought about the parallel that might have with if it's your first night in Fight Club, you have to fight. Like, you don't get to be an observer. Like, you have to share effectively, which I thought was an interesting concept. I also just want to draw one more thing. Can we just give a soft round of applause for Meatloaf, Big Bob, who was hilarious in this movie? Particularly my favorite scene being when he's like, Cornelius, it's me, Bob. And he starts licking his fingers and throws his donut or whatever.
Yeah.
Like, I've never seen Meatloaf in any other movie, but I wish that I had, because I have such a great time with him through and through, and every time he's on the screen in Fight Club. Meatloaf, shout out to you, big dog. Hope your 80s royalties are carrying you through.
They knew what they were doing with him because we fall in love with him and then they take him out,
As soon as I started
doing.
watching it and he shows up in the first 3 minutes, I was like, I know who Jen's favorite character is going to be. It's a wrap. This ain't even a question.
Okay, any other last big thoughts about Fight Club? How do you think this is gonna feel / how you're gonna feel about it if you had to project like 25 years from now? Oh, well, let's just say 10 years from now, since it's been 10 years since you both have watched it. Sarah, I'm curious your thoughts as well.
How am I going to feel about it a week from now?
I feel like Pat's gonna be like 85 and just being like, this is timeless.
No,
like handing out copies in the streets.
This isn't Friday, okay? Let's back that truck up. I think that there are still, like I said, themes that will resonate, but we are like especially like Nate and I, we are about to age past these characters. And so I think that the relatability is significantly going to minimize, and it's going to be more of a nostalgic effect where I relate to this movie the same way I relate to the Ninja Turtles. I'm not a fucking turtle. I didn't grow up in a sewer. I didn't have a rat sensei. I'm just here for a good time and can tap into the positive feelings I had while on this ride.
Honestly, I was too young for that whole phase of ennui that we had in the late 90s with like Office Space and American Beauty and The Matrix. I have one nitpick before we close out. How did Fight Club get started? All right. Because I can see a group of people going up to a couple people fighting and being like, oh, we should break this up or we should see what's going on. But you see one guy whooping his own ass in a bar parking lot. No one's going up to that. They're just like, well, we should get the fuck out of here.
Sarah, is this the predominant thought that also circulated your brain space? Because
no, it absolutely did. And I was like, what are we doing here? This would not be a thing if it was just one dude.
Because boredom.
Yeah, no, I had the exact same.
Like the flashback they show it for like a quarter of a second, and they're just like, yeah, just breeze right past it. Don't even show it.
Yeah, that was one of those like, I call BS on this. That's not how that would go down.
Let's see what this guy's doing. I'd follow this man into battle.
Right. I'd align to his political and worldly views. Now, that's a fair question. I will say I did love the symphony of his fight with his boss and the way they like tee it up through as well. And then,
great.
Like security, and they've had this like building tension because he's been more and more messy and just whatever. And then like it just ends with, and then at our most perfect moment, and he's just like, don't hit me.
Yeah.
Like it was like just such a.
It's a great scene.
Yeah.
Like, the first time you watch this, like, what the fuck's going on?
Right.
And
he's like, and now we have corporate sponsorship.
Yeah.
52 paychecks, fax machine, computer. Like
the next cut to him being just like bloodied up, rolling all this stuff out. Yep. It's really good. Okay, another last big thing. So hit them all.
I don't know. Does anyone else feel weird being like preached anti-consumerism to by like a corporate product? I don't know how I feel about this, but like this movie was like funded partially by Starbucks.
Wait, are you serious?
Yeah, they at the last minute said you can't destroy our storefront, but like, we'll still put like product placement throughout the rest of the movie, which is why it was just like local coffee shop or whatever it was called.
All right, Jen, I'll see you tomorrow down in Pike Place. We're gonna pick it outside of Starbucks patient zero and be like, fuck you, Fight Club forever.
Starbucks patient zero. Oh my god. I didn't know that they helped fund this. That's wild.
I always like want to ask, like, all right, well, what's your angle though? Like, I get what you're I get the message, but what do you want from me?
They want you to download their app, motherfucker.
Cash in those stars.
Yeah,
exactly.
Double
get the DVD
stars.
copy.
I have it already. Come on, I've had it for 20 years.
Sarah, are there any big scenes that like really stood out to you or you had some spicy feelings about?
Didn't she just answer this question? Sorry, Sarah, go ahead. Are there more?
Okay, so there is a weird little detail that
Of course.
I'm going to bring up. So I don't know that we've had this conversation when you guys have been on the pod before, but I have a theory that in movies, when you see particularly a white heterosexual male with a pinky ring on, then that means that they are a villain. And in this film, it's once our narrator has gone all over the place looking for Tyler, he can't find Tyler, and he's in the hotel room, and Tyler shows up. Tyler is then wearing a pinky ring. And that is the shift in the movie where Tyler kind of goes from the guide to the antagonist, and he begins like going after Marla and like sending people after Marla. And so I thought that was just an interesting little detail. That is when Tyler's dress kind of changes too, and then he is wearing a pinky ring in that scene when he becomes more antagonistic. So it was just an interesting little detail that I didn't expect to find in Fight Club, but could potentially support my hypothesis a little.
How dare you talk about Jack Sparrow that way?
Seriously. Also, I feel targeted because I've never been a ring guy, and I've been doing nothing but playing with a ring the entire time we've been recording, and it has been on my pinky so many times.
I'm like,
only applies in movies.
Is it new?
Not in real life?
Yeah, it's like a cheapo thing, and I was just like, I'm gonna feel this out. I'm gonna see what's like. Could I be a ring guy? Am I a ring guy? Like, I don't know. I've never tried to be a ring guy, and it bounces between the right ring finger and the pinky, and I've literally been doing nothing but bouncing it between this entire time. And I feel like Sarah has some unchecked aggression that she's trying to project onto me in the scheme of something about villains.
Sarah, you might be onto something here. I think I'm sold.
You dick.
The hypothesis only applies to movies.
Just like the evidence is all here.
Not to real life.
So now that we've reviewed Fight Club and we get to cash in next a real great indie A24 horror, right?
What?
Oh yeah. This is good.
I think this is the only thing that makes logical sense, really.
Okay, but I get
one for him.
Fine,
one for him,
one for him, and then one for each of us.
Whoa.
Yeah.
You're signing us up for 3 movies? I get to pick the A24 movie.
No.
What? Why?
You can't just keep picking movies, Pat.
Look, Nate, I didn't pick this movie. This movie picked us as soon as Jen told me what the theming was for the podcast. Okay? The universe spoke. It's bigger than us. Go blow up a building. I don't care. By the way, I will say another thing that resonates. When you got student loans, blowing up some buildings and have all your like monetary records sounds real fucking appetizing. It's too bad they all live in the cloud now because you can't kill the cloud. But I was like, man, if Sally Mae had a server room in the basement, I'd be like, blow that bitch up. Let's go.
Yeah, that's another thing. Like when you first watch it and it's just like, no one's getting hurt. Like all our people aren't here. You reset everyone's debt back to zero. You're just like, man, I don't know. He's got some good ideas. Sounds pretty airtight to me.
I see no flaws.
Tyler Durden effect is really infiltrated into this recording. I'm seeing Nate just get lured right in.
It's like, the more that we talk about
We've got one of Tyler's war boys here with us too.
Right? The next time we go to record a podcast, Nate's gonna have the bald head and be shirtless.
Mm-hmm.
In his office, in his little phone booth.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. All right, let's wrap up this Fight Club pod. This is our review and discussion and chaos talking about Fight Club. You can find it available to stream, I believe, on Hulu. Thank you for listening to this week's episode of Movies and Us.
Or you could just be a home media owner and not be a loser.
Or that. Wow. Yeah, thank you to you both for joining us for this conversation. Always a good time.
Always happy to be here. Yeah. But seriously, open enrollment, it's really important, guys.
I hate you.
All right. Well, our name, Movies and Us, sums it up. We're all about movies and the powerful ways we can connect with each other and the world around us. This podcast is about all of us and our shared stories. Everyone is welcome here, and we're so glad you spent time with us today. You can subscribe to this podcast on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you tune to your favorite shows. Drop us a review letting us know your thoughts about revisiting Fight Club. You can connect with us on Instagram, Threads, and TikTok at Movies and Us Pod, or email us at moviesandUsPod@gmail.com. This episode was edited by Melvin Benson from the Cinematic Doctrine podcast. Check out his show for more great movie conversations.
Melvin!
Yeah, really though, shout out to Melvin, honestly, for figuring out the audio between the 4 of us. My goodness, and these 2.
I like the name Melvin. Melvin's got a good name.
Melvin Benson. That's a great name. Thank you, Melvin. Okay, well, thank you two for joining. I'm sure they'll be back soon. They've been a bunch on the pod, so if you want to hear more of this great dynamic connection, the fight clubs of the past. Go listen to some of our past episodes. We'll be back next week to discuss the Netflix film Amelia Perez. I hope you have an amazing week, and we'll see y'all soon.
And just so you know, Fight Club's based on a book, and it's great. And apparently I learned this weekend there is a Fight Club 2. All right, Jen, end the call.
There's a Fight Club 2?
Pat, can you mute? We're getting a lot of noise out of your mic.
It's me talking.
Oh, that's what that is.